Welcome to my latest YouTube video. I am so excited today because I get a chance to talk to a friend, colleague, and someone I so greatly admire, Wendy Behary. Welcome, Wendy. I am so glad to do this. You and I have been connected probably for 10 years, ever since I wrote my first book.
Okay.
And I honor your work. It inspires me. It has influenced me. And I'm grateful that we get to talk. Let people know who you are and the wonderful idea for the conversation that we're going to have today.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on your podcast program. It's wonderful, and for all the contributions that you are making in the field. I'm Wendy Behary. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be sitting here with Ross, and we're going to talk today about quieting your inner critic. I am the author of Disarming the Narcissist, now in its third edition. And my expertise is really in the subject of working with and treating people who have narcissistic personalities, along with those people who are dealing with them and being impacted by them. That has been my 30-year career, if you will. But I'm also keenly aware, having worked with this population, about the fact that they are often driven by or compensating for a very constant hum of this demanding internal critic. Do more, do better, be the best. What's wrong with you? You didn't try hard enough. And because of that need for extraordinariness, the inner critic is kind of always pumping away, driving the acceleration of performance to the unfortunate cost on intimacy and relationships. We all have an inner critic. And as I was doing some research for other presentations on this topic recently and some writing I've been doing, I realized, we all have one. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's more of a guide than it is a critic. And much of the time it's a critic. It's demanding, it's devaluing, it's dismissive. It can be very, very hurtful, sometimes menacing, the worst case scenarios at the top of the spectrum. And trying to just evacuate it by yelling at it, talking to ourselves, sometimes can help for limited amounts of time. But because we live at the mercy of our memory, it doesn't necessarily have long-lasting effects. So I started thinking about how we might be able to convert the message of the critic if we could get a better sense of what its real intention is, because we know it as an anchor. It has roots in our very beginnings, called discipline and limit setting and frustration tolerance as we're coming into the world and developing our little selves and preparing for life thereafter. So that's what I thought we could talk about a bit today.
It's interesting because when we chose this topic, I thought, it's something I don't talk about. Therefore, I want to do it because it's something that I discovered in myself, which actually is like ground zero for most of what I eventually write about, is that these negative thoughts, these, you're dumb, you're to this, you're not that. If we can remove ourselves from the emotional or affective, that physical feeling of being disturbed and angry, and with the help of a psychotherapist, look at what the actual dialogue is. And I ask my clients, they say, well, no one's ever going to trust me. I'm not smart enough. I'm going to fail at school. And I would ask, how long have you been believing this? And how long have you been saying this? And more often than not, my clients, who are primarily SLDs or codependents, will say, well, ever since I was a child. And then I'll ask, who or which people do you remember saying this to you? And then they'll say, well, my dad said it. And then we'll explore that. And I'll kind of do what I do in my therapy approach and, do a little bit of regression. And then we will find out that this dialogue, this sliver of the inner critic, is a manifestation from what someone had told them, reinforced them, and as a child gaslit into them. Very quickly, gaslighting is when you purposely try to change a person or alter a person by proving there's something wrong with them that they never had, a disorder that they never had, a problem they never had, systematically manipulating the environment and proving to them that this narrative of their problem is so big that they eventually need to isolate themselves. So if we take that as a very general definition of gaslighting, and we look at, a child at 8 years old who is being told you're not smart enough, whether it's told directly or indirectly, then that feeling, that belief is carried inside through all sorts of psychological processes. And when my client identifies, oh yeah, that's what my mom said. So what I do is I use the term voice. So that is then the voice of your father.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about that voice, whether it was done purposely or it just happened because of attachment trauma. And I should say, foundationally, all my clients have attachment trauma because that's a part of SLDD. And that really what we have is the voice of someone else.
I definitely think the inner critic can come from a number of sources. It can be as simple as, when we look at early development, right out of the womb, there's the interruption of pleasure. There's frustration tolerance that's forced upon a child just sometimes out of practical reasons, sometimes out of impairment of a parent. As the child grows and needs to learn about limits, right? That enough is enough and something is too much, that chocolate, eating it too much will make you sick, or time to do your homework or bedtime. I mean, any time, discipline is not a dirty word, but how it gets delivered can be either very toxic or it can be sometimes a little too loose and non-existent or something in the middle. At best, a child comes into the environment with some degree of sensitivity, sometimes a lot, sometimes something in the moderate range.
Right.
And they're met with an environment that can attend to that thoughtfully without assassinating their character. If you come from an environment like you're describing where the criticism is more menacing, it's more punitive, and it doesn't have good intention, we have to evacuate it. We have to find ways to confront it and evacuate, because it's an internalized voice. It is the internalized voice, or introject, as some experts would call it, that has now taken up residence in the brain as a way of looking out at the world and yourself, more specifically, how you fit in or how you don't. So, for some people, as I said, it can be more demanding. For others, it's just very devaluing. And for some, it's very punishing and can be dangerous. And, in my work, I've thought a lot about conversion techniques with the critic. A conversion technique would be, let's start with the best form of communication. Is that my intention matches the impact. So I want to let you know that I care about you as a person. Well, that wouldn't come out with, you're okay. That certainly would not deliver the message. If what I'm feeling here is that I want to convey a message of caring. So a parent who wants to convey a message of protecting a child from failure, promoting a child's well-being, be the best you can be because you're so bright. Well, that doesn't come out by saying, what were you thinking? You didn't try hard enough. You're such a lazy ass. That doesn't really convey the message of protection or promotion. So if we can get at intent, and we're not going to get at intention by interviewing the parent in most cases, but we know our clients very often, those listening know that we want to think that our parents did the best they could, even though it wasn't very good. And we ended up internalizing this voice. It might not even have been directed at us. Like you said, it may have been directed at another parent or a sibling. It could be vicarious. But what we also know from the research is that the number one thing one feels when they're exposed to that criticalness, especially if it's accompanied with anger, is shame. And so, it kind of helps to fertilize the inner critic. And I think that we can convert the message by finding our healthiest adult best self, if you will, that can take that intention. The intention is to promote me. So what would it sound like if it's more promotional and it's not ridiculing and pushing me so hard that it feels oppressive and burdensome and like I have no life? Well, it would sound like, you're really smart. You can do this. I believe in you. Make sure you rest. Make sure you care for yourself. Make sure you have balance in your life. It would be what we call in schema therapy, a good parent living in our head.
Before we proceed, what is schema therapy? Because you are at the forefront. You and Jeffrey Young are the top dogs, the inventors. What's the right word?
Yeah, well, Jeff Young is actually the founder of schema therapy. I was very privileged to meet him in 1989 when the model was still being developed. So I was part of that developmental think
Mhm.
tank, if you will,
Yeah.
in Manhattan. And we worked hard on expanding this once upon a time coming out of cognitive behavioral therapy approach into an approach that would look at the deeper issues connected to more complex problems.
Right.
So more personality problems, strong emotional problems. Schema therapy is really applicable to, a whole host of emotional and
Oh,
behavioral challenges that people face. So it's not limited to narcissism. But we
okay.
did develop a specific approach that can work with people who have narcissistic personalities, people who have
Mm,
long-standing depression and other types
right.
of personality problems. So it's a beautiful model that pays a lot of attention to kind of the inner script that
Right.
we've developed as a result of attachment ruptures, meaning early life experiences where our most important emotional needs are not being adequately met. And so the
Right.
schema is like a trait that has more than just a thought. It has strong emotion, strong
Mm,
somatic response, and can lead to maladaptive coping responses that become self defeating, kind of like they were helpful when you were little and powerless, not so helpful in your adult life. And the
right.
whole work of schema therapy is really to use the resource of the imagination and emotion to engage one in unlearning some of these blueprints that have been laid down.
Everything that I know about schema therapy, including when I first researched it, who knows, 20 years ago or 15
Mm,
years ago when it first came out, is really something that is a powerful, research, validated, reliable approach. But what you're saying matches up with a point of view that I have is that my SLD clients have this self-love deficit disorder, and I have a impairment to describe this theory, primarily because they were exposed to attachment trauma by a parent who was pathologically narcissistic with a personality disorder and a parent who was what I call self-love deficient or codependent. And if a child found a way to survive, they would take that survival experience and move forward with this relationship template and eventually would be attracted to, as my book says, human magnet syndrome, pathological narcissist. So the focus I have is with these clients who have this attachment trauma that a lot of them aren't aware of, that is disassociated from our awareness, stored in the limbic system. And so when we start working on the inner critic, it's important to find out the origins of that.
yes.
And sometimes, especially with my healthier clients, it doesn't go back to attachment experiences. It's not the voice of a parent. My focus is, with my clients, is to trace back the origins. And then let's assume, because my clients are SLDs, the origins come from this attachment experience we talk about, is understand how we adopted that thought and that version, that judgment,
Mm-hmm,
and now perpetrate it against
mm-hmm,
ourselves.
mm-hmm,
And because the clients who see me are like, I think the average age is in their 40s, the goal is not to go back to their parents and have, family therapy and work it out. They have to figure out a way to solve, heal, and overcome what was either given to them or not given to them. And to that would be my version of the conversion, is to reparent yourself, is to find a way, and I'd like for you to talk more about that, but find a way to give yourself grace, nurturing, forgiveness when you think you're making a mistake, but especially when you are making a mistake and that inner
mm-hmm.
critic is just out of control.
Right.
So, what do you think about the reparenting concept, or the term you use? What I remember is parenting.
Good
Thoughts about
parent.
that?
Yeah, I mean, limited reparenting was the term founded by Dr. Jeffrey Young in schema therapy many years ago, but it
Yeah.
is considered a limited and adaptive reparenting role. So the therapist really takes the role as being this agent for change and being a good parent. So, what would a good parent do in this situation? What does the child
Yeah.
need in this moment? And all the work of schema therapy is about taking maladaptive reactions and turning them into adaptive ones. That doesn't mean, making everything rosy. You can't take a past that was filled with suffering and make it happy, but what you can do is reorganize the message that got attached to it and got carried throughout. because that's really where we all end up being hijacked, right? So we call it schema activation, and or the critic is being activated because schemas are being activated. So it looks like this. I see someone glaring at me, and if I happen to have abandonment issues,
Hmm.
I might, the inner critic goes, well, there you go, you're going to be rejected now. Look what you just
Right.
set yourself up for. I may not remember being told that as a
Right.
child. Maybe I don't remember anyone saying that to me. It could be really subtle. It could be that I was born with a biological sensitivity, super sensitivity, more than the average, and was with an environment that was maybe just a little too disconnected,
Right.
more detached, more inhibited. Or I just forgot because we forget, so there is that too. So we have to assume that there is an origin, there's a way that voice got internalized, and what it picks up in its content is anything that's related to what you were referring to as attachment ruptures, what has happened in our life where those early unmet needs have not been met. So if it's deprivation, if it's a feeling of defectiveness, these are schemas that we would name. If it's mistrust, then the inner critic goes, well, now you're just being stupid. You're going to get taken advantage of. Like, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you figure this out? What's taking you so long? A schema can be anything in general, but
Right.
specifically to schema therapy, early maladaptive schemas, or EMS, there are 18 that have been analyzed
Hmm.
in the research.
Right.
These 18 early, we all have them. Everybody has schemas 1, 2, 3, 10, 12. We all have them because nobody comes from a perfect beginning. We all have biology. We all have
Hmm.
environment. We have that match that makes personality, right? Schemas are basically what we think of as like these truths that live
Hmm.
within us, these traits that have been laid down as a result of our experiences,
Right.
where our needs were not adequately met. They could be really toxic in some cases or more
Hmm.
subtle in others, but when they are activated, they are exaggerated to the point where you're literally in a time warped moment. You
Hmm.
don't know it, but suddenly you're feeling as if like your world is crashing in, or someone's about to hurt you, or you're going to be rejected, or you're going to be embarrassed, or something's going to happen, something related specifically to an event that is very reminiscent. So
Got it.
schemas are these traits. They're not always active. They're
Right.
activated under certain conditions that look like, smell like, taste like. And
Hmm.
then if we're lucky, our executive functioning lights up and our healthy adult self, our good parent, comes on board and can help us go, that's old.
Right.
That's once upon a time. That was then. This is now. You're okay. You're safe. If you're not lucky or you haven't quite gotten there yet, your good parent doesn't come on board so quickly, you're left to use the survival instincts and constructs that you designed when you were very young, which means we end up sometimes in self-defeating places that can feel good in the moment, like I tuck my head under the covers, but then in the aftermath, it's, gosh, I missed the whole party.
Right.
I missed the whole event because I was so busy beating myself up in the mirror that I didn't look good. So, it's the reparenting, it's the
Right.
rescripting that we do in imagery, in the therapy relationship, to be able to begin to rethink the way we've looked at these things over time, the way we have felt them
Right.
in our bodies, the way we have responded to them or reacted even better, as opposed
Hmm.
to really reflecting on them and shifting the choices that we make from a sturdier, healthier position.
First of all, that was incredibly clear. My basic point of view is that SLDs cannot overcome the problem, which is self-love deficiency, shame,
Hmm.
loneliness, this
Hmm.
addiction to a relationship, and all the things that make people self-love deficient and codependent, if we just focus on the symptoms. And for that matter, the symptom could be, you know, I have to quit criticizing myself. I have to shut that critic down. And so I create this theoretical picture that my clients feel very comfortable with, and that is your negativity, pessimism, negative self talk comes from attachment trauma, comes
Hmm.
from the crucible within which
Hmm.
most of what you learned about life as a child would be impacted in your adult relationships and your adult mental health. And so we go backwards and backwards until we find the origin of the pattern. And the reparenting process, they will join me in moving back into the unknown territory of their childhood feelings and memories. The treatment is called the Healing the Inner Trauma Child treatment method, which I call the Hitch method. But the idea is to find where my client shut down, disassociated, or their memories or their feelings became unconscious. Similar to PTSD, except this is a big swath of their life. And help them understand there is this treasure trove of information about who they are, that because the memories are so painful and for good reason have been transferred to the part of their brain, the limbic system, to manage that for a safety reason, is to help them get healthier so that they can revisit those memories, those experiences that are disassociated. And in that affective experience where they can feel it throughout their body and remember it, they are connecting to what I call the inner trauma child, which is memories of the child right before the trauma became so bad they had to shut it down. And in that environment, which there is this, I don't think of it in the moment, but reparenting where someone trusts you, we revisit the origins of the inner critic and get to understand what they could never understand in any form of traditional psychotherapy, because you can't process or understand that which your brain decided it's too traumatic, so it's going to take it offline. And it's not that what I do is all about this type of work. It's a sliver. But when I can get someone to explore some of their, for lack of better words, inner critic dialogue is connected to something that was so bad and so harmful that they've never remembered, and able to not only remember it, but help them integrate it, help them facilitate them to be psychologically healthy enough so that they can bring what I was able to connect, help them experience back into their conscious thinking. And that is the type of inner critic that I am focusing on.
And I think what you're doing is very much like what we're doing in schema therapy. We're integrating, we're not eclectic.
Okay?
So it's a very deliberate integration of schools of thinking that will help to accomplish the mission that has been generated by a very thoughtful conceptualization of each case. So what that means is I want to know the narrative really well, inside out and backwards. I want to understand once upon a time there was a little boy, little girl who, etc. What you experienced, your strengths, your challenges, how you coped, your sense of the world. And then, what we're trying to do is correct these biased emotional experiences. How do we do that? Through the limited reparenting, through the use of dialogues, imagination, looking back, rescripting, being able to feel that sense of getting a need met that was never met, which automatically starts to change. It's not the magic fix. It's not the be all end all to quiet the inner critic, but it sure is helpful when you can lessen the intensity, lessen the frequency, get to a place of recovery more quickly where you're really making sense out of what's happening. You're differentiating past from present. You're recognizing that voice in your head that isn't helpful and converting it, as I said, into something that can be helpful to you. Because I do think the critic is the perpetrator of a lot of the suffering, because it grabs all the content from what we've learned and then it just bellows it out there in our brain, either loudly or sometimes just, implicitly without awareness.
No matter what your mental health is or what diagnosis fits you, if you do the digging, you find the pieces, you work through the problems, the trauma, then you can be more sturdy and strong enough, integrated enough to be able to then look at the inner critic that comes from you. You can't
Yes.
keep blaming your parents. Well, please tell my viewers and listeners where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we could talk for hours, obviously, but thank you for sharing your wonderful contributions. Thank you for having me. If you want to hear more about my work, have access to my book or my podcasts or anything else, Wendy Behary, you can type my name in your browser or
Yeah.
disarmingthenarcissist.com.
Thank you, and
Thank you too, Ross. Thank you so much.
let's keep in touch.
Let's do. Take good care.
You too.